Hello, everyone. James is here. Welcome to Easy English Talks podcast. We're going to be doing a deep dive today into some common grammar mistakes. You know, the kind of things that even native English speakers can trip up on sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to help us unpack all this and give you some great tips for speaking and writing better English, we have our grammar guru, Emily.
Hi, everyone.
That's true, right? Some of these mistakes, they sound all right when you're just talking with friends.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writing, or maybe in a more professional kind of setting, it really can make a difference to know the finer points of grammar.
Oh, absolutely. It can make your English really shine if you can get these little details right.
All right, so let's kick things off with something that I know a lot of learners struggle with, and that is tenses. It's really easy to get them mixed up.
It is, yeah.
So, Emily, what is it about tenses that makes them so tricky?
Well, I think it's because tenses, they tell us about time, right? When something happened or will happen or is happening right now.
Right.
And if you use the wrong tense, it can change the whole meaning of what you're trying to say. You know, even a little change in tense can have a big impact. Like, think about the difference between saying, I meet my mother
Right.
for coffee every Sunday, which means you do it regularly.
Yeah.
Compared to, I met my mother for coffee yesterday, which is clearly in the past.
Right. So you're saying that even a tiny little change to the tense can change how the listener understands what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can make a big difference to how your message comes across. And sometimes the correct tense is quite subtle. Like, imagine you're telling a friend about a plan you have. You wouldn't say, I will meet her tomorrow, because that makes it sound uncertain.
Right. Yeah, like you haven't decided yet or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're still thinking about it. Instead, you'd say, I'm meeting her tomorrow, because that's a set plan.
Right. It's decided. It's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's tenses. Now let's move on to another area that can be a bit confusing, and that is countable and uncountable nouns.
Yeah, this one trips people up all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's because it's a different way of thinking about nouns. You know, it all comes down to whether we can count individual units of something. Like, let's take the word orange.
Okay.
That's a countable noun. You can have one orange, two oranges. You can use a or an with them, and they have a plural form.
Right.
But then you have a word like advice, and that's uncountable. You can't say advices or an advice.
So how would you talk about different amounts of something like advice? I wouldn't say, I have 3 advices for you.
You wouldn't know. You'd say something like, I have 3 pieces of advice for you.
Okay.
Or, I have some advice for you. It's a different way of looking at it.
Right, you can't count advice, but you can count pieces of advice.
Exactly.
All right, and now for something I think a lot of people find really, really challenging. Irregular verbs.
Ah, yes, the verbs that just love to break all the rules.
They really do. They really do. So unlike regular verbs where you just add ed to make the past tense, these irregular verbs, they just do their own thing.
Exactly, yeah. They have these unique forms that you really just have to learn by heart.
Right, and there's just so many of them. So any tips for how to actually tackle these beasts?
Well, I think it helps to focus on the most common ones first. The verbs you're going to come across again and again, like be, do, see, have, go, make, come, take, and get.
Right, the ones that you just can't avoid.
Exactly. You can't avoid them, so it's best to just kind of learn them and get them under your belt.
Now, sometimes it's not just the past tense that's irregular, is it? Like, let's take forget as an example. You have forget, forgot, and forgotten.
3 different forms for different situations.
Yeah. So how do these different forms work?
Well, forget is the infinitive, right? It's the basic form of the verb. So you'd say, I forget things easily in the present tense.
Right.
But then for the past tense, you'd say, I forgot my keys. And then you have forgotten, which is the past participle. So you'd use that with have to form the present perfect tense, like, I have forgotten your name.
Right. So it's like each irregular verb has its own personality, its own little quirks.
That's a great way to put it. It's like they each have their own little story to tell. And just like getting to know a person, it takes time to get to know these irregular verbs and understand their unique forms. But the more you practice, the more natural they'll become.
Okay, so let's move on to another mistake that even advanced learners can make. Subject-Verb Agreement.
Yeah. This one can be a bit sneaky because it often sounds right, even when it's actually grammatically incorrect.
Okay, yeah, I've heard this one.
Like you might hear someone say, that car look expensive. But because car is singular, the verb needs to be singular too.
So it should be, that car looks expensive.
Exactly.
It seems so simple when you point it out like that, but I can definitely see how it would be easy to make that mistake, especially in a longer sentence when you've got lots of different things going on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to lose track of whether your subject is singular or plural. But it's important, especially when you're writing, because those little errors can make your writing look a bit unprofessional.
Right, yeah. You want to look like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So paying attention to subject-verb agreement, it's a small detail, but it can make a big difference.
All right, so let's delve into the world of auxiliary verbs.
Ah, yes. The helping verbs. They work alongside the main verbs in a sentence.
Right.
And the most common ones are do, be, and have.
And they're kind of like the sidekicks of the grammar world, aren't they?
Yeah.
They might not be the main attraction, but they're essential for getting the job done.
I like that, yeah. They're like the supporting actors that really make the main verb shine.
So, if I'm understanding this right, do is used for simple tenses, be for continuous tenses, and have for perfect tenses.
You got it. You're absolutely right.
Okay, and these verbs, they can also be main verbs, can't they?
They can, yeah. They wear many hats, these verbs.
Like in the sentence, I am happy, am is the main verb. But in the sentence, I am writing a letter, am is an auxiliary verb. It's helping writing to express that continuous action.
Exactly. That's a great example. You can see how they can be used in different ways.
So these auxiliary verbs, they're pretty versatile, aren't they?
They are, yeah. And they can be tricky to master, but once you understand how they work, they're really like the key to unlocking all those different English tenses.
I think we've got time for one more grammar gremlin before we need to take a break. Let's talk about articles. The, a, and an.
Okay, yeah. Those little words that can cause so much confusion,
Yeah.
especially for learners whose native language doesn't have articles.
Yeah, those articles are really the unsung heroes of grammar, aren't they? Small but mighty. So what is it about them that makes them so tricky?
Well, I think it's because they're all about being specific or general. The is our definite article. We use it when we're talking about something specific. And then you have a and an, which are indefinite articles. We use those when we're talking about something general.
So like if you're at a restaurant and you want to see the menu, you wouldn't say to the waiter, "Can I have the menu?" Because you haven't seen it yet, right? You'd say, "Can I have a menu?"
Exactly. You haven't specified which menu you want. You just want any menu.
Right.
But then once you've chosen what you want to eat, you could point at the menu and say, "I'll have the steak, please." You're referring to a specific steak on the menu.
Right, you've made it specific. And sometimes we don't need an article at all, like I love pizza.
Yeah.
No article needed there.
Exactly. That's right. Articles can be a little tricky. There's no doubt about that. But once you understand those basic principles, you can start to use them with more confidence.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already. Tenses, countable and uncountable nouns, irregular verbs, subject-verb agreement, auxiliary verbs, and articles. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I think it's important to remember that we're not aiming for perfection here.
Right.
We all make mistakes. The important thing is to just keep practicing and learning.
I completely agree.
And don't be afraid to experiment and make those mistakes, because that's how we learn and improve.
Definitely.
All right, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we'll be diving into some more common grammar mistakes and how to avoid them. All right, so we've talked about some pretty fundamental grammar points. Now let's move on to something that can really affect the style of your writing. Overusing adverbs.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. It's easy to get carried away with those L-lily words.
It is, yeah. And sometimes it can make your writing sound a bit clunky and amateurish.
Right, like you're trying too hard or something.
Exactly. Adverbs definitely have their place, but if you use too many of them, it can weaken the impact of your verbs. Like, think about this sentence. The door opened quickly, and she walked slowly into the room. It's grammatically correct, but it just feels a bit...
Overdone.
Yes, overdone. We can actually make it much more concise and vivid if we choose stronger verbs. Like, instead of saying, the door opened quickly, we could say, the door flew open.
Oh, I like that. And then instead of she walked slowly into the room, we could say she crept into the room.
Wow, yeah. That paints such a clearer picture in the reader's mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes all you need is the right verb, and you can ditch the adverb altogether.
Okay, what about word order in questions?
Yeah.
I know this can be a bit of a head-scratcher, especially for people who are just starting to learn English.
Yeah, it's all about getting that question structure right. Because if the word order is off, it can sound more like a statement or even a command rather than a question.
Right. Like, I've definitely heard learners say things like, you are going to the store, instead of, are you going to the store?
Exactly. That's a perfect example. In English, we usually invert the subject and the auxiliary verb to form a question. So instead of, you are, it becomes are you.
Right, so you're switching them around.
Yeah, exactly. You flip them. And it's a simple rule, but it makes a big difference in how your question is understood.
It really does, yeah.
And it's worth remembering that there are different types of questions, each with their own word order. Like you have yes/no questions, like are you hungry? Then you have why questions, like what are you eating? And then you have tag questions, like you're coming with us, aren't you?
Oh, right, right.
So yeah, questions can be tricky, but once you understand the basic word order for each type, it becomes a lot easier.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the passive voice.
Yes. This one has a bit of a reputation for making writing sound stuffy and impersonal.
Yeah, I think people sometimes overuse it because they think it sounds more formal or sophisticated.
That's a common misconception.
Yeah.
Because in reality, it can often make writing feel convoluted and less direct.
Right, like you're trying to sound smart, but you end up just confusing everyone.
Exactly. Remember, the active voice puts the subject of the sentence in charge of the action, which makes your writing much more dynamic and engaging.
Okay, so can you give us an example of how the passive and active voice compare?
Sure, let's say we're writing about someone baking a cake. The passive voice would be, the cake was baked by Mary. But the active voice is much more straightforward. Mary baked the cake.
Yeah, I see what you mean. The active voice definitely sounds more natural and to the point.
Exactly. It's all about getting straight to the point and letting those verbs shine.
Right, so all you English learners out there, don't be afraid to take charge of your sentences and make those subjects the stars of the show.
Yes, let those verbs shine. Let those sentences sing with the power of the active voice.
You know, talking about all these common mistakes, it just makes me realize that even native English speakers have to stay on their toes.
That's so true. Language is constantly evolving and changing. What might have been considered a mistake a few decades ago might be perfectly acceptable today.
It really is, yeah.
So we're all lifelong learners in a way. We never stop learning and refining our understanding of the language.
It's true. And the more we learn about these nuances, the more confident and expressive we become in our communication.
Exactly. It's a journey, but it's a rewarding one.
It is. So, Emily, if I got to ask, for English learners out there who really want to improve their grammar, what are some of your favorite resources?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, you've got the classic grammar books and workbooks.
Right, right. The tried and true.
Exactly. But honestly, these days, there are so many amazing online resources, too. Don't underestimate those.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Websites, apps, all that good stuff.
Exactly. A lot of them have interactive exercises and quizzes, which can be a really fun way to, test your knowledge and see how you're progressing.
Yeah, and you can do it at your own pace.
Exactly. And, another thing I always recommend is finding a language exchange partner.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
If you can find someone who's a native English speaker who wants to learn your language, you can kind of swap skills.
Yeah, and you get that real-life practice.
Exactly. You can practice speaking and get feedback from a native speaker. And, who knows, you might even make a new friend along the way.
That's a great point. Speaking of friends and real-life situations, I know a lot of learners get nervous about making grammar mistakes when they're actually talking to people.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for overcoming that fear?
I do. I think the biggest thing to remember is that communication is the goal. We're not aiming for perfection here. Fluency isn't about speaking perfectly. It's about getting your message across.
Right, it's about connecting with people.
Exactly. And you know what? Even native speakers make grammar mistakes sometimes.
Oh, they do all the time.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So we shouldn't put so much pressure on ourselves.
Absolutely not. It's all about finding that balance between accuracy and fluency. Don't be afraid to experiment, take risks with the language.
Yeah, put yourself out there.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
I love that. It's about giving yourself permission to play with the language a little bit, not be so scared of making a mistake.
Right, exactly. Because every mistake is a learning opportunity.
It really is, yeah. It's a chance to, think about what went wrong and how you can do it better next time.
So to all those English learners out there, don't let the fear of making a mistake hold you back. Embrace the journey, have fun with it. And remember, everyone makes mistakes.
Everyone.
Even those of us who've been speaking English our whole lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a constant learning process.
Well, Emily, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today and for this deep dive into some of the most common grammar mistakes.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy talking about grammar. It's such a fascinating topic.
It is. And I hope our listeners have learned a lot too. And who knows, maybe they'll even feel a little bit more confident about their own English skills.
I hope so.
Don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your friends. Bye, and see you next time. Bye-bye.